Ramchal Eloi Keinu Aser Eloi Lanu Riyeh Yamidateinu Dalim Vereiki Ramchal Eloi Keinu Aser Eloi Lanu Riyeh Yamidateinu Dalim Vereiki HaNeshama Lo Deyagu Tolo Kurusa Alama Lo HaNeshama Lo HaNeshama Lo Deyagu Tolo Kurusa Alama Lo HaNeshama Lo
quiet. Could you hear me? I am going to be switching over to the mic, so can you be quiet? Close the door, please. And then get your butt on there. Hello? Is everybody there? Everyone heard me. Okay. 1 second. Yes, one of the joys of having a daughter who's staying up too late is you get to hear me switching over. Funny, yeah. One moment, please. We have a child who would rather stay up till 11 o'clock than go to school and bed on time. So, my apologies for that glimpse of our domestic tranquility. Okay. Well, so I was thinking, because we're getting into some pretty heavy topics coming up very quickly in the book, and we left off, and it's been a week, and for various other reasons, my life has been pretty crazy. Well, anyway, I want to say thank you very much for coming, and welcome to the room. So I was hoping that we could just do some fundamentals in the back. There's really a lot of mini essays that the Ramchal has written, and they're included in the back of the book. And they, in a very condensed version of a lot of the topics that he introduces in the beginning chapters that we've gone over. And so he comes at them in a different perspective at times. He reiterates a lot of his information, but he also comes at them in a different way. So I was thinking of going through a few of them, not all of them, mainly the Creator, the spiritual world, and then getting into, I think there was reward and punishment as well. So thank you again for your patience. So he's reiterating a lot of the information, and I just was hoping that it may be provoking some questions and some comments, because there's some really important ideas that are coming up that, unless you have a basic grasp of some of the concepts that he's talking about, it's really easy to misinterpret some of the information coming up and to look at it in a very different way, because everybody does this, and I'm as guilty as anybody. You'll fill in the gaps with your own personal biases, which we all do anyway. But the better you understand his material, the better you understand his perspective. When you get into things that you may not necessarily agree with, you can at least try and comprehend the direction and the mentality and the principles and the mindset that he's using to when he presents these ideas. So you can judge them as accurately as possible with the information that he's given you. So that being said, we're going to do a little bit of this review, and then next week we'll get into some very interesting topics and discussions, God willing. So I'm on page 361 in the back of the book, if you have the book. And this is the essay entitled The Creator. And I'll read a bit and comment, and please absolutely, if you can, questions at any point are very welcome. So I will begin. The Creator. The first thing that a person must know is that there exists a being who is the master of everything that exists and who brought all things into being at the time he desired. He sustains them as long as he so desires and rules over them with complete authority. This being is God. This being is perfect in every way, having absolutely no imperfection whatsoever. He does not depend on anything else and is not affected by anything whatsoever. God's existence is absolutely without beginning or end. That is, he did not pass from non-existence into existence and will absolutely never pass into non-existence. He therefore always was and always will be, and it is impossible for him to cease to exist. God is the cause of all that is, but he himself is not the result of any cause. Rather, his existence is necessary, intrinsic to his nature. It is also necessary to know that God has absolutely no structure, nor does he have any element of multiplicity. Rather, he is structureless and ultimately simple. Nothing that applies to the physical relates to God at all. He is divorced from any boundary or limit, from every association and from every natural law. Above all, it is necessary to know that the true essence and nature of God cannot be grasped at all. It has no analogy, neither with any concept that exists among created things, nor with any idea that the imagination can conceive or the intellect can comprehend. There are no words or descriptions which are truly fitting and proper in relation to God. Yes, page 361. This is the essay in the Creator. This is from Derech Hashem. I don't know if you have. I have the Feldheim version. I don't know if there's any other versions, but so this is describing a really important concept of the unknowable God. This God that you can't. It's like the best analogy, and it's a pretty poor analogy, is it's like the skyscraper that disappears in the smog and clouds. That you know there has to be more to the building, but you cannot comprehend what it is because it's not obtainable to you with the means that you normally process the world, which is your sight. So the idea is that there is the true essence of God, the true existence of God is absolutely unfathomable, unknowable to us, and this is a concept called the Ein Sof, that everything and nothingness, that there's God in God's true essence. Even talking in this regard is absolutely impossible to apply any thought. So, that being said, we know that these concepts exist, that we cannot know God in His true essence. To know God in His true essence would be God, and that's quite impossible. But yet here we are speaking about God, speaking about a Creator, and talking about our own creation. So God is knowable to us, and so, but this concept that all aspects of God are knowable, that you can define even the infinite unknowable God, is kind of crazy. The idea is that you have the perception of the reality of a perception that exists, that must exist, but we can't even get to that point. I don't know if you have, Elena, the book. The Feldheim version has a series of essays in the back, and that's what I'm reading from. So I will continue. Oh, the pocket version. Okay. I'll read. If you need me to slow it up, please just go ahead and ask. So I'll continue reading. When we speak of God, we make use of words, but we do so only in borrowed or metaphorical terms, so that we should understand what we must regarding Him. Our vocabulary contains only words pertaining to natural concepts, bound by the limitations of created things, and it is therefore impossible for us to say anything at all without these words. But all who seek God and speak about Him must clearly realize that any descriptions or words used in relation to God do not truly relate to Him. They can apply only as borrowed terms and in no other sense. One must be very careful in this respect. So I think that one of the really important concepts to draw from the very beginning of the Ramchal's book is, while there is this unknowable aspect of God, this unobtainable aspect of God, the reality that God exists is known to us, but it's known to us in a very limited perspective. To think that we can comprehend God in His true essence, using the word He, she, it, all these things are just arbitrary to our really limited perspective, and as a result, to limit God's revelation to a very small perspective is very dangerous. But at the same time, to know that there is a correct interpretation, a correct way to view God, just like this, a correct way to relate to fellow human beings and to each other, and there's an incorrect way. There's the same can be said of God as well in our relationship to Him, how we relate to Him. But that being said, to think that the revelation that we do have through nature, through scriptures, through mitzvot, through oral traditions and different things, is the only thing that God is very incorrect. It's a very minuscule drop in the bucket compared to the ocean kind of a thing. So our reality in how we perceive ourselves is very, very, very limited. And our ability to reach beyond this limitation in the physical world is a very important ability that we're all given, and that's why he goes into the spiritual world next. So we know we're limited physically, we're limited by nature, but yet we have the ability to comprehend God at a much higher level than most created beings in the universe, and that is that we live in the physical world, but we have the ability to reach into the spiritual world as well. And that's why we exist here, is to do both. So he's going into the spiritual realm next. So if you have any questions or comments, please, like I said, raise your hand. So I'll continue reading a little bit more. Just as God, through his infinite ability, created physical things that are visible to the eye, he likewise saw fit to create other entities that are vastly superior to these, which cannot be detected or felt by our physical senses. And just as he gave each physical entity its own particular limitations and properties, so he gave different properties to higher entities, as his wisdom decreed proper according to their ultimate purpose. Things that God delineated with boundaries that are familiar to us, which have natural properties that we can detect with our senses, are called physical. Things that are divorced from these properties are called spiritual, and the properties that they have, as well as the rules they must follow, are what are appropriate for their ultimate purpose, as mentioned earlier. It is necessary to know that just as different categories exist among physical entities, each one having its own particular properties, so different categories exist in the other realm, all belonging to the general class of the spiritual. And just as these categories differ, so do their particular properties. There is, however, one important general rule that applies to the entire class of spiritual entities. That is the fact that their actual nature and properties cannot be grasped by us in the way that they truly are. All we know is that such entities exist, and we are aware of some concepts relating to them as handed down to us by our prophets and sages. This general class of spiritual beings is divided into three categories. One consists of transcendental forces, the second of angels, and the third of souls. So again, here we have this existence that we cannot comprehend in the physical realm. And when we try and think about the spiritual realm, and again, we're limited by our physical reality and our ability to understand the universe through a physical means. So you have a lot of, in regards to God, you have a lot of anthropomorphisms. You have a lot of human characteristics being applied to God in Scripture. He's patient, kind, loving, long-suffering, jealous, anger, all of these, the hands of God, the arms of God, the eyes of God. So you have human emotions and human characteristics and attributes being applied to God, so we can comprehend how God interacts with us in the universe. And in regards to spiritual concepts, one of the most difficult passages to read, just as at a very simplistic level, is Ezekiel's vision into the spiritual realm. He's talking about wings and chariots and wheels within wheels, and he's trying to describe these really abstract spiritual concepts using terminology that doesn't even fit. There's really no vocabulary to describe what he sees, so he does the best he can, and it comes out sounding very difficult and and it can be a difficult passage to comprehend. So he says here, we know that there's been a revelation of the spiritual realm as much as possible through the prophets, that they've been given glimpses, that God has revealed the spiritual realm to individuals in ways that average people do not see. And so they're given this huge task of trying to relay this information in such a way that it can even be comprehended in a small amount by us in the physical realm. And so there is tradition and interpretations that have developed regarding these visions and this understanding. So when you read the scriptures, the prophets especially, and you see their visions, there is a way to interpret these things that have developed throughout time. And he's trying to say that not only do we have the revelation of the prophets, but we also have a system of interpretation and a way to understand and apply these visions and different spiritual concepts to our own world. They weren't given in a vacuum. These prophets existed within a culture, within a people, And so their visions and their prophecies had context and had meaning to the people of their time, but also to the general, to the people to which they were given as well. So now going to the idea that we're not alone in the universe. We know we're not alone. We know God exists, but there are other entities that exist as well. We call them, these are the entities that exist within the spiritual realms. You have angels, and he talks in his book. He doesn't reiterate them here. You have the angelic beings. You have the demons, the shadim. You have different classes of beings that exist for a reason. They exist for a purpose. They're not just superfluous. They didn't just happen by accident. Every one of these entities that exist in the spiritual realm is there for a reason. They serve a function and a role, and they have a purpose. And as a result of this, they are part of the organization in the spiritual realm that keeps the universe functioning. And so continue on here talking about the forces here. So here, my apology. So, and he also talks about souls and the souls that are bound to us in their physical bodies as well. So I'll continue reading. The transcendental forces are very pure, superior spiritual entities which are divorced from the physical. These entities are the very closest to God's divine presence, the Shekhinah, and he consistently manifests himself over them. They are given names according to their levels, the wheels of the throne, Ophanim, and the like. Angels are spiritual entities that were created to act as God's agents, doing whatever he desires. Each one is set over a particular concept and placed in charge of it by the highest will. Angels have different levels, one below the other, and each level has its own bounds and properties as deemed proper by the highest wisdom. So you have a hierarchy, and you have different levels of existence for these spiritual beings. That when you say closest to God, we're not talking physical closeness, because the spiritual realm, again, is not physicality. So distance is not a matter of space, as in our world, in our universe, in our reality. Closeness to God means that it's similarities. So they are more like God, His true essence. The more similar something is in the spiritual realm, we said it before, the closer it is, the more dissimilar, the further apart they are. So as you go down this hierarchy, so to speak, they become more and more divorced from the essence of God, and not as similar. And so he's saying in the spiritual world there are forces that exist that cause things to happen, and the same is true in our own physical world as well. There are forces that exist, there are fundamental forces that keep the universe together and the world functioning the way we see it and the way we expect it. And he's saying the same is true in the spiritual realm. There are forces that have roles, they have function, they have an existence that is deemed by God, and they have an area in which it's mutable, like we are. We can change, they can't. They have a function. Now we can act upon those forces, we can interact with them, and it's like the idea of polluting upstream. If you pollute upstream, then you're going to get polluted water downstream. So you can pollute these forces and they can turn against you. And you see an example in Scripture about when Israel was in the land and they sinned, then the land would turn against them. Now the land is physically incapable of returning any negative energy. But what God's saying is the understanding is that these forces will become polluted by their sin, and they will, like polluting the water you drink from, it will cause their ability to interact in the physical world will be turned into a negative way, and it'll act against them. Yeah, we're getting into a little bit more of the... Oh, yep, let Bruce talk. Thank you. Sorry, I was looking at the screen.
Yeah, just a quick question. Isn't it true that, or is it, that as far as the angels, you have, for lack of a, I guess, better word, you have good angels and you have bad angels, and they never change sides. In other words, the good always are good, the bad always are bad. Is that true? It's almost like two different realms, two different worlds, a world of evil and a world of good, I guess. Is that true or false? That basically angels are what they are. They're either good or they're either angels of light or angels of darkness. Mike is free.
Well, and I do have to do more research on this, but my initial understanding is it depends upon the level at which the angel exists. Now, there are traditions that you create spiritual energy through your actions. And when you say you create spiritual energy through your actions, that literally means that what is that energy you're creating? And the idea is that it's what you would call an angel, not at a very high level, but you literally are creating angels in a sense. And also the demons are their own little category. I'll get to that in a moment, but you can create angels through your actions, and that there are some traditions that say that through creating these angels, good or bad, they're, like I said, very low level, that these forces, these spiritual forces that you create through your actions in the physical world, they can be influenced, they can be changed, and the fact is that in that low level, these angels can act against you either as blessings or curses. You can literally transform them into angels of blessing through your actions, but that's at a very low level. At the higher levels, it's a little more complicated, if that makes any sense to you. But where the angel falls in the hierarchy is very important. But there are traditions that these angels, you can call the angels the evil realm, and the angels that act on that side of justice and pure justice without any type of I always say justice with unmitigated, without any mercy at all, that they will be, there are some traditions that the evil realm is brought back into its proper place. It's welcomed back in. It's because every aspect of creation in the physical world and the spiritual world is existing and functioning in its proper role. It's not like God can get, it's not like God lost control of a specific area. Even the evil realm has to stay within its own boundaries and limitations. And if you read Ramchal earlier, he says that basically the only limitation in evil in the physical world is that it can't completely overwhelm our world. So I'll let you know.
Okay, so you were talking about the angels that in effect we create with our thoughts and actions. I guess I was more applying to pretty much the standard fixed angelic realm, those that were put in place to basically maintain a fixed set of rules and do a fixed set of things. Okay, so I should have clarified that. So there are various types of and categories of, I guess, what we would call angels, and so I guess I probably confused it. But yeah, I think I see what you are referring to. I mean, the angelic realm itself is, I'm assuming, fairly complex, and stereotyping or oversimplifying is probably something that a person shouldn't do. I don't know, especially if they're an ignorant person like me. Mike is free.
Yeah, the whole concept of, and it's a very amazing concept of, like you talk about the breaking of the vessels, that like the whole idea of how does an infinite being interact with a finite creation? And so it's just an amazing idea. The concepts that through the very vehicle that brought us the knowledge and ability to connect to God also brought us our biggest woe, which is evil and deficiency. So the very mechanism God used to create the ability for us to interact and to know God by choosing to serve God also creates the biggest enemy that we fight with daily, which is a Sahara, our evil inclination. And evil, we battle against evil and deficiency in this world at every turn. And so it's like a double-edged sword. Literally, it's the double-edged sword in the garden. It's that turning, flaming sword that brings both blessing and curse at the same time. It's a pretty amazing concept. But when that But when that deficiency is brought back into its proper balance, then the evil realm will have served its purpose and will be brought back into balance as well. So I'll let you go.
Yeah, just a brief comment. I actually was going to say something earlier. Earlier you're talking about the infinite nature of God, how He's incomprehensible and beyond our abilities. Personally, in my opinion, I think that basic point is, in my opinion, a cause of much confusion. Is people tend to dramatically oversimplify God. In my opinion, they bring God down to almost a human level. And that's just one of the main things I've grasped from all of this, is that it's really rare for people to fully recognize the infinity of God, the incomprehensible, ineffable nature of God. And by trying to bring Him down to our level, in effect, creating a God in man's own image, I think God is just drastically oversimplified, and He loses His infinity. I think, God, in effect, God is not infinite in a person's common understanding of God. That's just my own personal opinion and observation, is that fact alone, if it alone was recognized, the incomprehensible nature of God, I think it would help a lot. Even infinity is a poor concept. Mike is free.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. I know that when I was really young and I got my first telescope, that I was outside looking at the moon with my brother, and this thinking, like, this really scary concept that you're this tiny little speck in this huge universe, and the same is true. You can get over you when you think about the true essence of God, that you can't even think about the true essence of God at all, and yet you can comprehend and perceive that a Creator exists, and that you exist, and that the world is real, and that you are here. It's pretty amazing, and it's like one of the rabbis that I used to study says the miracle isn't that God created the universe. The miracle of the universe is that we can comprehend God. So going to the Shadim, the idea of the demons, the demonic realm is this, like, a mixture between the two, the physical and the spiritual. They don't fall in, they have attributes that correspond to both, but they're not like humans, where we have a physical body and a spiritual soul, and these two opposites are brought together in this physical realm. That they're a unique class of created beings, and that they serve a function, that they live off of the negative energy that humanity creates through their actions. So they live off the murder and violence and anger and hatred and vice that goes on every day. That literally is their spiritual food. And a lot of the idolatry that was done is compared to is called demon worship, because the essence of the food and these activities that would go into the worship of these various idols were the base instincts, the animal instincts of man: eating, war, sexual things. All these base animalistic urges were glorified in a negative way through idolatry, and it's because these entities feed off of the energy of the negative spiritual actions that mankind does. It's their food. It's their sustenance. And as a result, where there's decay and sin and evil and great deficiency, then this is where this class of beings exists to feed off of that. So the idea is that they procreate, they can be destroyed. So it's a really, like you said, it's a lot of tradition that goes along with the understanding of the spiritual realm. And like a lot of the concepts that the Ramchal really touches upon in his book, there are books just about these concepts. And there's books about books, so it's pretty deep. You can go as deep as you want when you start to study these various concepts that the Ramchal brings up in his writings. And so he takes us from the angelic realm, the forces in the angelic realm, and he says, now there's a third class of the spiritual beings, and they're called souls. So he says, souls are spiritual entities. I'm reading from Ramchal, page 365. Souls are spiritual entities that are destined to enter bodies and be attached to them with a very strong bond. They also have their own particular properties, according to the concept and states. That is, souls exist in a number of states, since they have a level of existence outside the body, as well as within the body. Their existence outside the body is furthermore divided into two categories: one before birth, before they enter the body, and the second after death, after they leave the body, following their existence in it. Souls have properties that vary according to each of these states and are given the ability to undergo various experiences according to what is suitable to each particular state. So there's a really important concept: is your consciousness doesn't begin with birth and doesn't end with your death, that there is your true essence, this great part of yourself that exists before you were born and exists after your death, and it has a consciousness, it has experiences, it has a reality that exists beyond our very flash in the pan life in this world. So when you enter and when you exit this world doesn't mean that your existence began and ends at these points in time. That you have this essence, you have a spiritual self that exists at a different level, and it transcends time, it transcends the bounds of this world. And yet, in this great quandary of the universe, this spiritual self is attached to this physical decaying body, and the two have this coexistence that weakens the spiritual self to such an extent that the soul takes a big power hit in that it cannot experience the toils and labors of its good deeds in this world. And so, and the deficiency and the pollution of our physical world is so great that we have to die and we have to go through resurrection for this bond to be brought together, our true spiritual and physical self to be brought together in the proper state. And so, in this world, the only place that these polar opposites, spiritual and physical, can coexist is in this realm. Because in the spiritual realm, he said, as he said before, something that two things that are very dissimilar, that are not alike at all, are considered spiritually distant. And so the only place where some two dissimilar things can be brought together is in the physical world, where space and time exist. And you can, and we talked about before, you can be sitting next to somebody physically, but you can have your mind completely not at all there. So you can be sitting there physically, but your mind's someplace else. It's an abstract concept, and it's one that we have. Then the same is true. That's why the physical realm is this amazing place where the polar opposite of physical and spiritual can coexist in a way and interact. Yeah, it's here in us, and that's and so we're basically spiritually schizophrenic from birth. We have this great desire to connect to God, and that's our desire Yitzhak Tov, this inclination towards good, to fleeing from deficiency, fleeing from anything that keeps us from spiritual light. And we have this physical body with all of its urges and this force that is attached to that, and that's called the Yitzhahara, this inclination towards evil. Not evil necessarily like evil in going out murdering and killing and raping. It's evil in that anything that detracts from God, detracts you from pursuing your relationship with God, can be considered evil. Eating, sleeping, going to all these necessary activities keep you entrenched in the spiritual, in the physical world, and basically obscure your true spiritual essence. And so they're necessary for you to live and to function in the physical world, but they're evil in that they keep you from spiritual pursuits. So evil is not always quote unquote bad. It's anything that causes deficiency, and we know the true essence of creation is not physical, it's spiritual. So these actions of eating and sleeping and marriage and procreating and working and building a house and keeping a roof over your head are all things that keep you from being spiritually minded and in your spiritual pursuits. And as a result, it's difficult in this world. It's very easy in this world to become overly entrenched in the materialistic world and to forget and to become detached from your spiritual self. So it's a constant struggle. And so you look at the Torah and the commandments that are contained within the Torah, and you see a lot of them are geared towards controlling and channeling our physical activities and using them to become closer to God, using them not as a means to themselves, an end to themselves, but using them to serve God in everything that we do. So as a result, the Torah talks about, you're to eat. When you eat, eating is important. It's, without eating, you'll die. But when you do eat, do these things. Do it in a proper way because the actions that you do have an effect on your soul, and you can fine-tune through using the physical world and the things that God has given us in the physical world in the proper way. You can fine-tune your spiritual ears. You can actually control the physical in such a way that you can become more spiritually sensitive and more. Basically, you can amplify your spiritual ears to hear and perceive God at a different level. So, and I said it before, instead of fleeing from the physical world and becoming like monastic and you're living this lifestyle and meditating 23 hours a day on a hill somewhere, you're absolutely required to become involved in the physical world, but to use it in such a way that you can bring yourself closer to God and elevate these base physical things as well. Yeah, we're the war zone. The battle's within us. Everything else is, I wouldn't say neutral territory, but it's definitely can be used against you or used by you and for you, depending on our actions. So I'll continue on a little bit more. So we talked about the consciousness of the soul. Okay, so he goes back into angels here. He says, the angels are all God's servants, obeying his command. Everything in the world, whether good or bad, is done through them. Consequently, the angels are divided into two groups, one being good, the other evil. That is, one group is appointed to do good, whether it be physical or spiritual, and the others are appointed for evil, both physical and spiritual. Those appointed for evil are called the angels of destruction and injurers, the mazikim, yeah. There is another type of created entity that exists, which is intermediate between the spiritual and physical. That is, in some ways, this type of entity shares the limitations of the physical in its concepts, and in some ways it is divorced from some of them. This category is known as the shadim. They have certain kinds of physical properties, but they are not like ours. They have some spiritual properties, but not the same as true spiritual beings. These entities also have various levels and different species, each one in its own properties and bounds. There is nothing in the world below, whether an entity or an event, which does not have some counterpart on high among the transcendental forces. Likewise, there is nothing down below that does not have over it an overseer belonging to the category of angels. These direct it and bring about various concepts and events as decreed by God. What these higher entities accomplish with the physical entities below them is called the influence. All influences that are directed from higher entities toward those below pass through the stars. The stars, therefore, are the closest things to the terrestrial world having such influence. Their influence, however, depends on what is transmitted to them from above. And here's an important concept that he didn't bring up. And you'll notice that in some of the writings of, in the scriptures, and you'll see in other writings as well, that the angelic realm is tied a lot to the stars. And this is why. It's very difficult to, see how the concept. The idea in Judaism is what you see in this physical world, the physical world, which we call natural, the natural world around us, the forces of nature, are like the clothing. It obscures the true work. Like, Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, she saw the great and powerful Oz, but Toto peels away the curtain and you see there's a man running all the controls behind it. The idea is that what we see is not, it's real, but the true essence of the world is brought about by spiritual forces. The wiring and the plumbing of the universe is brought about by these spiritual forces, which we call angels and forces. Are there good shadim? That's a good, as my understanding is, and I'd have to do a little more research, using the word good is bad. It's like they exist in this, I hate to use the word underworld, but they exist in this very negative, the evil realm. They exist in this realm of evil, and they're not considered. Yeah, but Judith, that being true, they are good and bad. In this physical world, there are real concepts of good and bad, sin, all these things are real. Now, in the ultimate reality of creation, and the purpose of creation is how we perceive, what we perceive as good, what we perceive as bad, what we perceive as evil, what we perceive as light, are all the realities imposed upon us by the physical world. In the ultimate reality, everything God is doing is for our good. That every nuance of our life is orchestrated by God for our ultimate good, and that every action in creation, every event that occurs in creation is carefully planned and brought about by God's ultimate plan for the world, which is to bring man to this relationship of good and to receive all the good that God can give us. But in this world, in our perception, we do have the perception of good and bad. And when you transcend those concepts of good and bad, light and darkness, and you're able to comprehend them at a higher level, meaning that ultimately they come from one source, they come from God. But that being said, in this world there is good and bad, and it's a consequence of the physical world. It's not true reality, but for us it is reality at this point. If that made any sense. And for the shadim, the level in which they exist and the role in which they function is always in the evil realm. Yeah, and the good and bad. There's a concept in Purim that you should work hard to obtain this elevated spiritual state, so that you wouldn't know that you don't know the difference between, blessed be Mordecai and cursed be Haman, meaning that they're both agents of God. As much as Mordecai was sent by God, so is Haman, and they were both agents of God's will. They were both carrying out God's function for what he wanted to accomplish. And so Haman was no less or no more an agent of God than Mordecai. And the same is true regarding the spiritual realm as well. These angels of destruction, the mazikim, which are they bring injury, the shadim, which feed off these negative forces in the world, they are no more, no less entities and agents of God than Michael and Gabriel and all these other angels as well. They were created by God for a function, and they're fulfilling that role. Now, one of the really important things regarding evil is how much evil has an influence on ourselves and in the world is directly dependent on the actions of ourselves and mankind as a whole. That there are limitations of evil in this world, and they're pretty, I hate to say, they're vague. One of the things that the Ramchal says, one of the only limitations of evil in this world, in meaning that how evil can interact and affect our world is that it can't completely overwhelm and destroy the world. So the amount of evil that exists, the amount of deficiency that exists in this world is directly as a result of mankind's actions. That we control the floodgates, we control the levers and the switches, and our actions either hold back the evil realm by bringing in more of God's light and spiritual light into the world and correcting deficiency that exists, or our actions can cause greater deficiency, obscure God's light, and evil have greater reign. In this world, we can be mankind's influence and ability to affect this creation is pretty extraordinary. And again, this is not to pass this over that their influence is, and it's a pretty abstract concept, but that when you see the angelic realm, you'll see them tied to heavenly bodies, especially the stars. So I thought that was pretty interesting. We continue reading a little bit more. God gave each of these spiritual entities the ability to act upon things below in a manner contrary to natural law when they are motivated by man below through special means that were prepared and designated to accomplish this. None of these, however, has the power to do anything it desires, as each has its limitations that were circumscribed for it. It is only within these limits and in the manner authorized that these methods can have the desired effect. So he's basically saying angels don't have will, which is not like the Hebrew word is ratzon. They don't have the ability to exert their choice in this world. They can't exert their will and impose their will in this world. They have to do the will of the Creator. They have to do the will of God. And so when they act, they're acting within a very specific function and a specific role, and they don't act outside of that. An angel of judgment doesn't comprehend mercy because that is not why that entity, that angel exists. That angel exists for judgment and acts within the realm of judgment. The actions of this angel of judgment are not tempered by mercy. It's not a consideration at all. This angel wants justice, wants judgment, and so when you look at the actions of the spiritual realm, you see that a lot of them fulfill their role. And when you see these entities being chastised in various ways through the prophets in Scripture, that they're chastised for not for going outside of the realm, but basically doing their job and doing it too well. Exactly, yeah. They like the serpent in the garden, he wanted judgment. He wanted to see Adam and Eve punished because he wants a judgment, and he saw to it. He got his wish, but he went above and beyond the call of duty. And so in a lot of these angelic realms, the angels are chastised for what they did. It's not that they strayed outside of judgment. That's why they were created, but they went above and beyond the call of duty to see that judgment and that justice was applied without any consideration for God's ultimate plan. So they really aren't imposing their own will. Their will is their created purpose is judgment. They just worked really hard to make sure it was imposed. Yeah, it's like the brown noser at the office who's working really hard to kiss up to the boss. I mean, they're not trying to usurp the boss's position. They're trying to get close to the boss. And doing so, they can really go too far and overstep their authority. Not that I hate saying authority, but they really, that's the only analogy that I can come up with. I'm just saying this is a and so I don't want absolutely, this is a realm where that it's all, what do you say, a lot of it is based in tradition and different understanding. So you're not saying, because we're saying this, you have to agree with it. And I'm not necessarily saying that I agree with everything that is being said as well, but it's nice to be able to talk about these concepts in a very different way and try and understand some of them. So if you have any comments or questions regarding this, please feel free to ask. But unlike there's a really important point. The angelic realm, they don't have free will. They're not making a free choice when they're acting to see judgment and justice opposed in the world. Because they're doing so because that's why they were created. Whereas we have this scope of choice that the angelic realm just doesn't have, or other spiritual entities do not have at all. And as a result of this, we have the ability to impact the spiritual and physical world in ways that the angelic realm has absolutely no ability. Good night, and thank you for coming. So we talked about the influence. All influences that are directed from the higher entities towards those below. I'm sorry, I'm rereading where we did. Sorry. Some of these methods are permitted to us. I'll go back a little bit more. None of these have the power to do None of these, however, has the power to do everything it desires, as each has its limitations that were circumscribed for it. It is only within these limits and in the manner authorized that these methods can have the desired effect. And it's talking about spiritual entities. Some of these methods are permitted to us, while others are forbidden. Permitted methods involve the book of creation, while the forbidden ones involve sorcery. And it talked about that a little bit, how the word used when the flaming sword and the angels that were guarding the entrance to the Garden of Eden, that one of the words there was actually the word used for sorcery as well. So, like the double-edged sword in this flaming, rotating sword, also there was a correct way to approach God, but then also built into the universe was an incorrect way to approach God as well. Sorry, I didn't mean to cough. So, now I'm going to, I will open up the room for some comments and questions, and please, absolutely. And this isn't just because we're saying these things, we're talking about them, doesn't mean that you have to agree with them. This is the nice thing about being a being conscious and able to discuss ideas. This is the really important point of existence, is to study and try and comprehend the universe that's around us, and to look at different concepts and ideas and to dissect them the best that we have. So, go ahead.
Yeah, and I'll just point out too that you got to bear in mind, Isabel is just barely scratching the surface of things that books have been written on. Volumes of books have been written on. So it's very difficult for someone in that position that Isabel is in now to really thoroughly explain things. She can't. She just can't do it. So just bear that in mind also, that you're hearing just tidbits of things that if you actually studied further on your own, you may actually discover you do agree with it. But because of just the briefness of what she has, when she presents things, you can't really go into detail. So that's just the only caution I would give. The little bit of study I've done with the books I've gotten, I've recognized that is you can't jump to conclusions upon first hearing a concept, because the concepts themselves go very deep. And I've found myself often questioning something when I first come across it as I study it. And then as I get deeper into it, I realize I actually agree with it. So that's just the only little caution I'd put out there, is that bear in mind we are very lightly touching upon subjects here for which there is much, much more that could be said and described. Mic is free.
Oh, let me try the microphone. Check, is it working tonight? No, nothing doing, huh? Bad sound? Okay, hold on. It was good earlier. Really low? Oh, let me see here. Outgoing volume from mic. How's this? Check 1 2 1 2 1 2. Check 1 2. Better. Okay. Yeah. Any teachings on some of these subjects, like angels or the soul or all these things, are all a matter of traditions and brought down, because the written Bible does not give us a lot of detail information on all these things. So the question always asked, any person should ask themselves is, where is the root of what I believe? And you can't just say it's the Bible, because all these traditions will inevitably say it's rooted in the Bible. Everything we're talking about tonight is rooted in the Bible. And so you have to ask, really, where what is it through? Where does it come from? And so the stuff we're talking about in this room has been has a long lineage going back many centuries before the time of Yeshua in the New Testament and all that. This stuff literally goes back to the time of Moses, and has been brought down through the Jewish people and their Torah that they received. And there's plenty of room for opinion and discussion even just within that stream. But anyhow, I just want to bring that up to people that there's been, I know what I grew up with was incredibly different, and of course it had its own origins. So that's all I'm going to leave it with for now. Hi, Maddie, and hand the mic back to Isabel.
One of the concepts regarding Hasatan is that as an angel of justice and judgment, that the idea that mankind would be receiving chesed, mercy from Hashem, was basically an anathema and the opposite of the existence of this angel of judgment. And as a result, that the rebellion is that the Hasatan was going to work overtime and stay late at the office to make sure mankind didn't get that chesed, that mankind would get the judgment that should be imposed upon them for the actions that they've done. And so that's when you say rebellion is not rebellion as like, okay, I was set here to be good and merciful and lighthearted and fluffy, and now I'm suddenly going to become this harsh, cruel, judgmental entity. No, it's that Hasatan was made from the beginning to act in the realm of justice and judgment, and seeing that mankind would ultimately be receiving chesed, would get off, for his actions, that there would be some type of reprieve from the results of their sins that is basically contrary to the existence of justice and judgment. And as a result, this entity went into hyperdrive and wanted to see that mankind was judged, because that's the purpose of the existence of Hasatan.
Yeah, briefly, my question earlier, right, Manu, but it just seems odd to me that there would be this intermediate realm of the Shadim, and that it's only demons. It just seems kind of odd that at every other level you have in effect opposites. They don't coexist in the same space, so to speak. And space is a bad term probably, but in the same entity or whatever. But nonetheless, they're there. So it just seemed weird to me that in the realm of the Shadim you would only have demons, which of course carries only negative, evil connotations. That just seems. I'm not saying I disagree with it. It just seems kind of weird to me. But anyway, I like this, brother. I like this review stuff. By the way, you're touching on a lot of stuff that's very interesting. Mike is free.
One of the analogies in the spiritual realm is, if you look in the physical world, in regards to the different genus classes, like the different types of species that exist, like in creation, like when you go from mammals, invertebrates to vertebrates, and then from reptiles and birds to mammals, that there's no, in some ways there's some big leaps, but in others there's like these subtle, there's animals that have characteristics of both, of like a reptilian characteristics and mammalian characteristics, like the platypus is this great example of this animal. It's not like any mammal that exists, but it has venom and things like a reptile. And there are a lot of species in the world that have this blend of these two different, I call them like transition species. And I can tell I'm a science geek, I'm sorry. So in the physical, you see the same thing in the spiritual world, that there's like these, like the Shadim is the best example of that. They exist in the physical, they exist in the spiritual, but they're not either or. So it's the only analogy that I can come up with. But they're basically like they're there like the cleanup crew for the negative energy and the spirit that mankind creates. They live off of that. They're the bottom feeders of the spiritual realm in some ways. So now the Ramchal talks about these. He's talked about creation. He's talked about the spiritual realm, and now he's saying, you have the ability to influence the spiritual realm. So he gets into the Torah and the commandments. This is so you can influence the spiritual realm. How do you do it? And so he goes into this next essay regarding the Torah and the commandments. So here we go. I'm going to read a little bit. This is page 369. The main point of creation was that God wanted to create man, who would then have the task of attaching himself to God, thus to enjoy his true good. This is accomplished through the fact that man has two ways before him, one being good and the other evil, and man has the power to choose whichever he desires. When, through his own free will and knowledge, he chooses good and rejects evil, then his true everlasting good is given to him. All other things were created only because the highest wisdom deemed them necessary in order for the universe to be complete, so that man would exist in the state mentioned above, where he could serve God and thus attain true good. Of course, we do not know why every single thing in the world was necessary, but we do know from our sages it is that the main element in all of creation is man, and that all other things were created only for his sake. And furthermore, that the main purpose in man's creation was for him to attain the true good. However, the highest wisdom perceived that in order for man to attain his true good, he must first be tested and pass this test. For this reason, God created a world where he could be tested. This is the physical world, a place where both good and evil exist, and where man can reject evil and choose good. Or reject good and choose evil, one desires. So we have a really hard task, and that was Adam and Eve had this really high, lofty, closely attached connection to God, and they lost it through their disobedience. They brought about a great deal of deficiency and separation in the world between mankind and God. Now there's a barrier that's called the physical world, and we have to do a great deal of struggle just to get beyond, just to not even obtain the same level that Adam and Eve had at the beginning before they fell. That we are constantly, through every action we do, from the moment we get up to the moment we go to bed, that every choice we make, whether big or small, is bringing about either a greater amount of God's light in our own world, in our own life and in the world, or bringing about a greater amount of deficiency in ourselves and in the world. And so a lot of religious systems that you see in the world say if you want to obtain like holiness, if you want to obtain relationship to whatever entity that they worship, you have to withdraw from the world. You have to withdraw from the physical world and become introspective and isolate yourself to become truly holy. Where Judaism says no, it's the hardest thing, even greater struggle, even the higher, loftier spiritual goal is to become involved in the world in such a way that from the moment you wake up to the moment you go to bed, that every action is directed towards the service of God. from what you put in your mouth, to what you think in your mind, to what you say to your spouse, to your friend, or your coworker, to how you view your fellow human being when you're sitting there, when you're standing in the market and you're paying the money. Do you see them as a human being created by God, or do you see them as somebody who's really, really making your life miserable because they're taking too much time to count out your change? So it's basically the attitude that you have towards the world that makes the difference. And that, contrary to what would one like to do, is you have to become involved in this physical world in the correct way to truly elevate yourself, because every action is why you're here. You are here to make choices. You're here to make the good choices. You're here to shun evil. You're here to choose good. And you're here to do that in the correct prescribed method and manner. And so, like, when Cain was considering murdering his brother, God says to him, sin's waiting for you, but you have the power and the ability to overcome it if you choose to. And so every choice we make, every time we turn away from physical, materialistic pursuits and turn towards God and use the world and the creation in which we were given in a proper way, we repair the damage done by Adam and Eve. And just like when you walk into your office building, that's not your stapler unless you bought it. That's not your chair. Those are all there for you to do your job. If you choose to take your sticky memo pad and do origami with it, you're not doing what it was meant. Your boss didn't provide that for you to do origami. He provided you with these tools to do your job, to function properly, and to fulfill the role for which you were hired. And the same is true in this world as well. We have everything that we're given was given to us not by chance, but for a purpose and for a reason. The resources, the people, the location, the things that happen in our world were there for a reason, and that reason is to utilize them in the service of God. So how much money you have or how little money you have, whether the person in line next to you was annoying or not, those are all events orchestrated by God for you to make the correct choice. And so I will let Bahanu speak.
That was a good question. Topic brought up earlier about Adam and Eve and where they existed. It does seem like in the first chapter of Genesis, they are one being. There's only Adam. Eve is still contained within Adam. There's some type of existence going on there. Then in the Garden of Eden, they're separate beings, and as Taz pointed out, they're talking with God, and then they're kicked out of the garden and are in this world that we live in. And I think that they just like we do now. Even Paul, in I think it's Colossians, one of those epistles. I think it's Colossians. He talks about us existing as a heavenly person as well. He says focus on your heavenly self. So we do exist in these different realms at the same time, but one, because of sin, our dominant level of existence is, I call it dominant for lack of a better word, I don't know if someone has a better word, is here in this physical realm. Of course, we do connect to God still spiritually, but it takes a lot of work. So when we are dominant in a different realm, like the Garden of Eden, or even higher, potentially, it doesn't require that amount of work to connect to God. And Paul even spoke about different types of entities, different types of flesh, different types of entities that exist. I would say that human beings, especially, we're in the image of God, and we exist in all the worlds. We've talked about these different worlds of these Hebrew terms, Asiya, Yetzirah, Beria. We exist in all of these at the same time, and depending on where our focus is. I mean, there are literally, I do believe there are people that are so spiritual, so very focused on God and righteous, that they may be walking among us, but their mindset is almost in a different realm than most of us, the overwhelming majority. I'll hand the mic over to Sealer 62.
Yes, it's Seiler. It's a German name. Look, I will be going. I just wanted to thank you. I wanted to firstly say that I came in a little bit naive. I didn't realise you were a Jewish room. And I kind of agree with Ben there, that our dialogue is such that we will probably have a lot that we disagree with, and I don't anticipate any shift in where your position is as to where mine is. My purpose of talking was simply to elaborate that there is no dialogue, because you have your faith placed on the Old Testament, and as Christians we have the New Testament, and so my comments on Revelations would probably mean nothing to you, but I do believe that the two sticks that the Bible talks about in the Old Testament, where when God returns, that there will be unification then, and so that's why I don't really have any problem with you guys, because I know that your trust and consistency in will ultimately bring about your deliverance, because when God returns, you'll see Him, and it will be Him who comes after you. You know, I mean, that's the bit that I want to leave you with: the fact that those two sticks will be brought back together by Him. So, with that, I can say thank you and all the very best.
This isn't a Jewish room, actually. I don't know if you're reading the text, but most here accept the New Testament and the Messiah presented in the New Testament. I don't know if you were okay. I just wanted you to understand that this is not. We're promoting. Basically promoting is a bad term. We're discussing Judaic principles simply because Judaic principles are the foundation of the New Testament. We discussed the Tanakh because that's the scripture, of course, that Yeshua, that Messiah and Peter and Paul and James and John, that's what they used and discussed. And also, actually, much of this stuff that we discuss is in the New Testament. It's found in the New Testament. The underpinnings of what we discuss are the underpinnings of the New Testament. And but no, we're not. Most of the people here do not reject the Messiah of the New Testament. We fully embrace him. Matter of fact, that's something we were just talking about in our last meeting, and which will probably be in the next meeting next week, is how the atonement was accomplished. So we fully embrace that atonement, and we actually discuss in proper detail, how that was done. Anyway, I just wanted to clarify that this is not a Jewish room. But we do discuss Judaic principles because they are the principles that are the basis of the New Testament. Mike is free.
And one of the fundamental Jewish principles is disagreeing and still being able to call yourself in the same camp, because not everybody is going to have 100% agreement, and if they did, then that's called brainwashing and you're in a cult and you better run. So you have the ability, you have latitude in your belief system, and so not everyone's going to reach the same conclusions, because every one of us is prone to error. It's just the fact of our existence. And there's a concept, a really important concept in Judaism called arguing for the sake of heaven, not for the sake of your ego, not for the sake of making sure that your opinion, because you believe it is right, is heard louder than the others, but it's arguing for the sake of ultimately you want the truth, regardless regardless of the truth maybe being a direct conflict with what you currently believe. That if you really are seeking the truth, then the process of study and discussion and debate is done not for the sake of proving yourself right, but ultimately getting to the fact where you have a higher level of revelation and you come closer to the ultimate truth of God and His in his reality. So that's what this is really an important thing. And when you argue at that level, when you're not trying to argue because, what your studies showed you to be right and you want to make sure everyone hears you, but you're actually trying to argue, trying and striving for truth, there's a big difference in the spirit of the debate. And it makes a big difference in how people take disagreements or information or belief systems that may be in direct conflict with what they believe. And so it's a really important concept to have, and I think most of us can tell when we're arguing for the sake of our ego versus when we're really looking for the truth. I know I can, because I tend to get my emotions stepped on. So that's my key is am I really looking for the truth, or do I just want people to understand that I'm right and I'm going to tell you why? So arguing for the sake of of arriving at ultimate truth is a really fun and exciting process. Is there any other questions? I'll continue reading a little bit if people would like. Okay, I'll continue reading regarding the Torah and Commandments essay. The ultimate nature of good and evil is respectively the holiness and corruption that God placed in the world. Holiness is a state of closeness to God, while corruption is that which is distant from Him. Holiness is the influence that God grants to one who is fit for it, and it is a bestowal that abides with Him. Corruption, on the other hand, is a state of separation, where God draws away, and a state of hiding, wherein God conceals Himself. The truth, however, is that God created spiritual forces especially for His purpose. It is from these forces that darkness and pollution emanate. Wherever such pollution exists, holiness draws away, and God's light hides itself. These forces are known as the forces of corruption. God gave man the ability to motivate the highest roots through his deeds. Man's deeds can therefore draw sustenance from God's holiness and the light of His good. On the other hand, they can also transmit pollution and corruption. And there's a really important concept. The word he uses here for corruption is tuma, to be. If you look at in reading the Torah, you see that this concept of being unclean or being impure is it can spread. That when a person has, through their actions, and it's not always because they quote unquote sinned, it may be, if you've had relations and you're not allowed into the temple and to do other things. It's not that you sin, you're fulfilling, you're married, and this is a natural function of marriage, but it's because of this physicality and the other corruption that you have to go through certain things to purify yourself. Now, there are other ways to become impure, and there's things that when a person does, it makes them impure. And if they don't deal with that corruption, that impurity, it can spread. It's viral. And so this is a concept of being spiritually corrupt, that you can have this impurity that basically like walking through the mud. And just like if you walk through the mud and you go into this pristine white house with this beautiful carpet and you sit on that, you're going to spread your filth everywhere unless you deal with it. And the same is true that, regarding holiness, that you can, when you're pure, you can go into different places. You can enter into the spiritual realm and have access to areas where you didn't before. It's And it's really amazing that in Torah there's a word for impurity and purity. If something's pure, then it's pure. But Hebrew has this word for this spiritual concept that doesn't exist in most languages. Is spiritually impure, and the corruption as well. And so basically, through our actions, we can cause deficiency. And he's saying deficiency. What is deficiency? He's used it all throughout the beginning of the Ramchal has talked about, our actions, our sin cause a greater amount of deficiency, not only in ourselves but in the world as well. And so he's saying, he's saying this deficiency is called corruption, and corruption spreads And the opposite state of corruption is holiness, is purity. And so just like it's basically like a windshield, like a window into you have the ability to cover it. Pulling down the shades would be corruption. You won't see the light won't get through. Or you can remove the shade, you can remove the filth and let the light shine through, and that is called holiness. And the concept is really important. This is not physical closeness. This is not, you're not going to be able to go somewhere to get physically close to God. It's a spiritual state. And there are spiritual afflictions in the Torah that are directly related to your spiritual status, and it's translated a lot in the Torah as leprosy. Leprosy, or zaras, is basically a physical manifestation of a spiritually corrupted person. That they've done something to cause this tumah, this corruption, to contaminate their soul. And God wants them to know, because in this world, in this physical world, we're pretty much unaware of the state of our spiritual status, that we can do immense spiritual damage to ourselves through our actions without becoming cognizant, without being aware of what we're actually doing. And so one of the methods that the Torah says, God will give you a warning sign, just like pain is a warning sign for your body, there's warning signs for spiritual illness as well, and that was zaras, or leprosy. And it could strike your house, it could strike your clothing, any of your possessions, it could strike your body. And so you have these concepts of spiritual contamination and spiritual purity, which are very important. And how are these states accomplished? And he's saying it's through our physical actions. So this is the relationship between our physical actions having a real spiritual consequence for ourselves and for the world, because and the community that we live in, because God was pretty adamant that if you see somebody who has the mark of leprosy, zaras, and I hate the word leprosy, it's a really bad translation, but they have a mark on their body, or a mark on their house, or a mark on their clothing, that individual in the community was responsible to deal with it, because this is a real big warning sign. And if they don't deal with it properly, then this tumah, this impurity will spread and it will affect everybody. And it's basically shutting off access to the spirit, to the ability to connect to the spiritual realm. It's shutting it off completely. Why? Because God says no impurity exists before me. Where impurity exists, I run the opposite direction. And so dealing with this spiritual impurity is vital and necessary to allow for God's light and God's presence to dwell within Israel. And when they don't deal with this in the proper way, then God's presence hides itself. So I'll continue reading a bit. The truth, however, is God created spiritual forces especially for this purpose. It is from these forces that darkness and pollution emanate. Wherever such pollution exists, holiness draws away from God's light and hides itself. These forces are known as the forces of corruption. I know I read that. I'm going back a bit, sorry. God gave man the ability to motivate the highest roots through his deeds. Really important. He's using the idea of roots and branches, and he's saying, just like the tree is drawing sustenance from the roots, then we're literally drawing spiritual sustenance. But we can also corrupt these forces. And like I talked about before, if you pollute upstream, then the water you're drinking downstream will be polluted. You have the ability to pollute these forces, and they can, there's passages in the Torah says, the land will vomit you out. Well, the land isn't going to do it. It's the spiritual forces that have been contaminated by the deeds of the people living there that will cause these spiritual entities to act in a negative way, like a feedback system, that they're going to get back what they put into it. And so when they're causing this corruption to exist within themselves, then it's going to corrupt these spiritual forces to act in a negative manner as well. Actually, there's a general understanding that man has lowered himself to such a lower spiritual existence that this zarat, the leprosy, doesn't exist today. We aren't worthy. We've gone so far down to the dregs of the spiritual that we aren't even worthy of warning sign anymore, which is not good, because just like pain is it definitely has it causes suffering, it causes unpleasant feelings, unpleasant emotions. Pain is really necessary. You'd bite your own tongue off if you didn't have pain when you're chewing your food. You'd walk on a broken leg. You'd put your hand down on a burner. A lot of the people that lose their limbs because of diabetes do so because they injured it and they didn't feel it. So pain is really necessary for your general health. It's a warning system, and it's really, really bad when that warning system isn't even there. And so this spiritual system of warning signs that God gave to Israel doesn't exist today because they're basically not worthy of it. They've lost that sensitivity. They've basically gone into spiritual neuropathy. Sorry. They're so insensitive that they can't, that those signs don't even show up, which is not a good thing. Yeah, I know. Sorry. I just threw that out there if anybody has a medical background. So let's see here. So as a result of this this corruption has to be dealt with, or not. If not, then you enter into the state of impurity, and God does not. And God's presence will literally turn away from you. And you can corrupt these forces, the forces that bring about our reality into existence. You can corrupt them. Just like if your pipes are full of lead and bacteria, then the water you're drinking will not be safe. You can literally cause pollution in those systems that are supposed to bring good into the world. There is only one true good, however, and that is attachment to God. We have already explained that the commandments are the means which transmit the emanations of God's holiness and the light of His good. These commandments are therefore the means through which true good can be achieved. The individual who sanctifies himself to a great degree with the emanation of God's holiness becomes fitting to be attached to Him and enjoy His true good. On the other hand, the person who corrupts himself with the pollution that we have mentioned becomes unfit to attach himself to God and is therefore cast away from Him. So the commandments are holy, righteous, and good. They're there for our benefit. Why? Because as we walk through life blind and unaware of the spiritual realm in so many ways, that we have to have the ability to protect our spiritual status. And how do you do that? By by partaking of the world and functioning in the physical realm in the proper way. It's like the navigation system to get through impurity in the world, and those are the commandments of God. So the closer you stick to those prescribed methods of living in the world, then the greater your ability to attach to God. Yeah, it's like spiritual GPS. And so you're able to avoid those actions which can cause great harm and damage to your own soul and to the world. Yeah. And as a result of this, if you traverse the world correctly, then you have the ability to obtain closeness to God. And doing the opposite you'll end up in East Dallas and your tires will be missing from your car. No, I'm kidding. No, the point is that you have, because of this disconnect to the spiritual world that we live with every day, God does want us to connect, but we're kind of lost as to how. So we'll continue a little bit more. There are, however, many levels with regard to the emanation of both holiness and pollution that we have discussed. It is likewise true of the good that is attained through good deeds, as well as the state of being cast away from God as a result of evil deeds. These levels are responsible for the differences that will exist between various individuals with regard to true excellence, as we shall explain shortly. It is also necessary to realize that just as man was given the power to have both holiness and pollution transmitted to himself, so is he given the ability to have holiness or pollution transmitted to all of creation through his deeds. Therefore, all creation can be either rectified or damaged spiritually because of man. This is counted as the merit for the for the righteous who benefit creation and a liability for the wicked who damage it, as will be discussed later. It's a pretty heavy, pretty amazing concept that little old you, little old me, can cause immense spiritual damage, not only in our own life, but we can transmit it through the whole world. Just like the poor guy who opens the email message that has the virus can bring down the whole company's website. We have the ability to do the same thing, and it's a poor analogy, but it's the same thing that we have through our actions. We can cause immense damage without even intending to. You can see that in the book of Joshua when they went in to take the land. One man in his greed, taking some gold from a place that was forbidden, caused the first defeat, caused the death of his fellow countrymen when they went up to war, and did a great deal of damage. And just like this is important that tumah, that this corruption can really spread. It can not only spread in yourself, but it can pollute everything around you. And so really not for yourself only, but for the creation in the world, for your fellow human beings. It's important to guard your actions carefully, because you really do have an effect. You're not here by accident. You have a reason for existence, and nobody else can do what you're here to do. Nobody else can do it because nobody else is made like you. They don't have the same characteristics. They don't have the same life. They don't have the same experiences or talents or weaknesses as anyone else. We're all individuals created for a purpose. And when you fulfill that purpose, you not only affect yourself in a very positive way, but you elevate creation as well. And so the Rabbi Moshe Chaim you elaborated on this really amazing teachings, and the action of this most obscure person can tip the scales in the most traumatic ways. And it's true that you or I, or you never know what action is going to be the one that creates the biggest difference. And you may never know, because in this world where the physical and the spiritual are so disconnected, you may not always get to see the immediate results of your actions. So it may be feeling like you spinning your mud, not accomplishing much, but you have no idea how profound the impact your actions may be having in the spiritual realm. Unless God peels back the curtains that obscure the spiritual reality in the world and give you a glimpse, you may not know until you stand before God. Yeah, but this is a really important one that was brought up in the last time the Ramchal study, was that we are all connected. If God is truly good and He desires only good for creation, and we know that when sin can affect not only yourself but the whole community, and He says, well, we know God is merciful, He's good, then how much more will the actions of good, the actions of fulfilling the commandments, turning toward God, doing a good deed, elevate not only yourself but the whole world. So we know that because God always tips the scale towards chesed, then we know that when we do an action that is merciful or good, then we can do even greater repair than if we had sinned. So, like he says, he curses people to the third and fourth generation, but his blessings go thousand. It goes much beyond that. So you can see that how much God really favors and tips the scale towards mercy. I'll continue reading this one here. The manner in which man's deeds transmit these influences is through the above-mentioned power of parallelism that exists between the entities below in the physical world and the highest forces. Whenever something physical is moved, a certain motivation reaches its counterpart force on high. That force then brings about the transmission of a particular influence. If a particular deed involves the fulfillment of a divine command, then this will strengthen its counterpart force, and as a result, an influence of holiness will be transmitted from God following the nature of this particular motivation. If, on the other hand, that particular deed is among those which must be avoided, it will cause a blemish on its counterpart force on high, according to the particular nature of that misdeed. This in turn causes God's light to conceal itself and retract. In its place, one of the forces of corruption is motivated, exactly opposite to the influence that has been concealed. This transmits pollution according to the particular motivation in question. Repentance removes the blemish in precisely the same manner. Power to act is taken away from this particular force of corruption that parallels the sin, and therefore the influence of holiness is brought back and appropriately transmitted. Now, it's interesting that when Israel was about to leave Mitzrayim, were about to leave Egypt, they did something pretty amazing. They took a lot of the wealth with them. So they took these elements like the linens and the scarlets, cloth, gold, silver, these elements that the Egyptians had been using to serve their pagan idols, and now many of these elements found their way into the tabernacle that was built by Bezalel to serve God. So these elements that were once elements of pollution and spreading corruption were now transformed into elements that were used to connect to God. And so the concept that, the chair you're sitting on, the cup that you hold, the world that we exist in, just like there's these fundamental forces of electromagnetism and gravity and all the forces that exist that cause our physical world to come in creation, that there are spiritual forces that cause these physical things to exist as well. And so when you do something as seemingly innocuous as taking this cup and using it to serve, your cup and using it on Shabbat to serve a guest, you're taking that cup, which can't do any good deed on its own, it's neutral, but you're taking the spiritual forces behind this and you're using it to connect to God. And so you're basically plugging that spiritual force behind that object into God. And when you take and misuse an object, then you're basically unplugging it from God and plugging it into the evil realm. So you're switching, you're taking the influence behind it and you're basically putting it on the opposing team. It's kind of like when Israel goes into the land to start taking back the land as prescribed by God, you see them going into different areas, and you can see the level of tumah, the level of corruption that has been brought about by how they're to interact with these elements of the land. There's some places where everything had to be destroyed. There was such a level of deep spiritual corruption that nothing could be redeemed except to be destroyed. And so when Israel went in and did the job they were supposed to, they brought about a great deal of tikkun and repair. And when you see, like in Joshua in the book there, in that example, he took something that was corrupt and he brought it into the midst of holiness, and God's presence fled as a result, and Israel paid. So this is why we're to be involved in the spiritual realm. These elements of creation can be used to serve God, but they can't on their own. They need an agent to bring them closer to God or take them further away. And you can see the same elements of the temple being misused by those nations that came and looted it. The feast that I'm trying to think now. What's the English word? Belshazzar. There's a feast in Jeremiah where he's taking out the elements of the temple and he's misusing them. He's taking the things that he got from the temple that the priests, the Kohanim, used to serve God, and he's he's bringing it out, saying, "Hey, look at me, look what I did." Yeah, belch what? Thank you so much. I can't think of his English word. So he's taking these things and he's having a party and he's misusing these holy objects. Thank you so much. Yes. And so he gets pretty he gets slammed for taking these elements that had been set aside and used and had been used as objects of holiness, and he's misusing them in his party, and God makes his presence known for doing that. And you can see these different elements of these pagan, society like Egypt being used in the service of God. So in the battle of corruption being held at bay and holiness and God's light being brought into the world, not only are we and our souls a real battle and spiritual, we're the battleground, but the territory not only encompasses us, but the things that we interact with on a daily basis. And so, I'll use the book of Revelation as an example of this concept, that you look and you see, what are they lamenting over? What is, when there's a passage where Babylon's destroyed and they're saying, what are they lamenting over? They're lamenting over the things. They're lamenting over gold and silver and they're lamenting over the things. And why are these things important? Because this is the way to spread spiritual influence in the world. That I guess it's not only the souls of man that are important and our battlegrounds that can be won or lost, but it's also the elements of creation and the spiritual forces as well that are behind them. And so this is a concept that you see in the Torah. A lot of the motivation behind how Israel was to interact with the land. The trees they couldn't cut down. Even when they went to war, they couldn't cut down a fruit tree. Why? Well, there's a spiritual force behind that, and its influence would act against them had they violated that commandment. And the foods that they were allowed to eat or not to eat. Why? What's innately wrong with a pig that you can't have your pork roast? Well, there's a spiritual influence behind that is not a good one for you to take. I mean, there might be two berries that look beautiful, but one's poison and the other one isn't. And so this concept's true in the spiritual world as well. And by using these forces or avoiding these things, you can take these spiritual forces and put them on the side of good, and they become agents and channels of God's light into the world. So I will leave. See here. Mic open, so thank you.
Yes, interesting. You're talking about, to me the point is, as trivial as things we do may seem, they can have enormous impact in realms and in ways we cannot see. It reminds me, just a physical example. On the, I don't know how many of you have ever heard of the Osprey, the V-22. The Osprey is that tilt rotor. It's an aircraft that takes off like a helicopter and then flies like a plane. It's called a tilt rotor, the V-22 Osprey. And it's a relatively new aircraft. Well, I worked on that, and it's a fairly large plane, or fairly large. They don't know whether to call it a plane or a helicopter, but it's got very thick wings and huge propellers, because of course it has to take off vertically. And I was walking along the top of the wing one day, looking at it, and there were these little tiny, they call them strakes, these little tiny things sticking up out of the wing, and they weren't. They were probably maybe a quarter inch, 3/8 inches tall on the wing. And I asked the guy, I said, what is that? He said, oh, if they weren't there, this thing wouldn't fly. And the point being, you have this large aircraft and these tiny little slivers of metal that stick up on the top of the wing. If they were not there, it would not fly at all. And actually, in what I do in aerodynamics, you see this all the time. The smallest little thing can have an enormous impact on the aerodynamics of an aircraft. It can make the difference between success or failure. And that's just one example. That small, even in the physical world, very small things can make very big impacts. And so, we see that in the physical world, and we see it, obviously, it also is in the spiritual world. Small things have big impact. The turbulence that's created by those little tiny slivers of metals in what they call basically it's the laminar flow area of the wing, that little tiny small section, and actually the people that don't know, I'm getting technical, but what creates lift on a wing is actually very, very small layer of air that's over that wing. So my point is that no matter how trivial our actions may seem, obviously they have enormous impacts. And I think it's useful just to think about that and dwell on that. And because for me anyway, it helps me to constrain myself and restrain myself and to think more before I so to speak, because I now try to think about what will be the impact of what I'm about to do, or what I'm about to think, or what I'm about to say, or where I am about to go, etc., etc. I think it's a useful concept for one to consider, is how our impact, or how our actions and even our thoughts can literally impact creation. Anyway, that's just my opinion. Mike is free.
Yeah, can you hear me? Look at the thing with the Woods that just happened recently. I think you all know who Tiger Woods is. He had some stuff go on in his personal life, and just because he is a famous person, the whole world is talking about it. Isn't that just amazing how someone's actions can affect the entire world? That's incredible.
Just again, just in my opinion, for myself, I think, and again, this is just my opinion, in this time where we have political strife, we have things going on, we have plans in place that many of us would disagree with, in my opinion, I personally try to get people to think this is a time to become more spiritual, more righteous, to draw closer to Hashem, for the purpose of, like it says in the New Testament, the prayers of a righteous man, the prayers of a tzaddik availeth much. That our actions, in my opinion, the closer we draw to the Most High God, the greater power perhaps we will have for good. And so study, fellowship, worship, to me, will resolve the physical problems. And I think that's one of the things that people don't realize is a spirituality will resolve physical problems in the world today. That's the whole concept of repair, of a creation, is how, in effect, it will be the spiritual realm that we ourselves influence that will end up repairing the physical realm that we ourselves live in. And to me, that's just a powerful thing to think about. Mike is free.
It's not. It's kind of late in the room to continue on, but this is just like, these essays are these essays are just amazing, and he's getting into in the way that he presents them is very, it's logical. He's laying out his case, but he's doing it in a much condensed version. And so, like next week we'll be getting back into the main text, but I'm going to be pulling out a couple of concepts from the essays again, because he reiterates them so well. No, you're welcome, Stella. It was a blessing having you. Thank you for coming to the room. it's the way he phrases some of that and some of the things is like, oh yeah, I'm just going to throw this new concept in that I didn't even touch upon. So I really enjoy the essays in the back. So we will begin in, I didn't even mark this section, pretty sad, where we left off. So thank you again, tremendous blessing having everyone here. In the room, what is going to be, where are we? I don't know. We were getting into I think we finished up around, I don't know, I'll figure it out. I have it, yeah, reward and punishment, and we'll figure it out. Well, I know we were in section 2 and we were talking about Providence. So, well, that's coming up for sure. I think I marked it. Did I mark it? Page 113. No, we got further than 113. I have all these marked pages and I can't tell which one I marked. We talked about the suffering of the Tzaddik and 123. Okay, 125. I believe we got around to like 120, page 125 or so. Oh, the essays? No, but he's getting in to talking about reward and punishment. So I would like to get into the whole reward and punishment essay before we get into the rest of the text, because he reiterates some really important concepts and he describes them in a really, he comes at it from a different angle, I guess I can say. So we'll be we'll do the reward and punishment section and then we'll get into the rest of the text. And by that time I've figured out precisely where we left off, or generally. And so again, it was blessing. So the room's open for just general discussion, and yeah, and next week we'll definitely get into some pretty interesting topic questions, comments.
Is that the Egyptian Book of the Dead, Bruce? I'm not familiar with the Buddhist Book of the Dead. Really? Interesting. Huh. Look into that.
Yeah. It was interesting, Bahanuk. I'm like you. I was thinking Egyptian, but it's a book. It was really interesting. I mean, I'm not saying I believe the stuff, but it was really interesting about how and there was actually some stuff that had some commonality with things we've discussed, which is why it was interesting to me. But yeah, it was a Buddhist. What they do is they basically, when a Buddhist dies in Tibet, that they would, these Buddhist monk guys would come and chant and guide the soul through the afterlife, through the Gehenna type of thing. And it was really interesting. Very, very interesting. What was I going to say? Oh, one thing that's interesting to me is how many people, maybe sad isn't a good word, but it's the only one I can think of. It's sad that people just don't recognize the Shadim. It's like they poo-poo the idea that, there's no such thing as demons, there's no such thing as Shadim. I mean, in my opinion, is that not a bit dangerous to deny certain things like that? I don't know. It's just weird. Mike is free.
One of the things I was going to say is, in some of the concepts, when you look outside of Judaism and you look at different religious concepts and different religious systems in the world, you see there are concepts that exist in almost every religious system and culture, and I was really bothered by that when I started to look. And people would use like some of the concepts that exist in Kabbalah and say, well, look, it exists in Hindu, in this one, in this religious system, and so therefore it has to be wrong. And like you look and you see, well, like the temple was built by the king of Tyre, and it was fairly close in in its dimensions and how it functioned and how the priesthood operated as to other temples and other religious systems and pagan nations around the world. And so when you look at it, it's not unique. So it makes you question if something is a real principle, then it's true, regardless of whether it's being applied properly or improperly. And so it's, again, draws you back to that whole double-edged sword, that there is a incorrect way and a correct way to connect to God. And sometimes the only way to know if it's true is to look at the motivation behind it. And it's like there's a safety program through a series of medical clinics in the area that has this really amazing display, and they take pills, medication, and put them next to look-alike candy. And it's like, what's more dangerous, something that's blatantly, obviously, like, off base, or something that's so close to the truth, so close to the original, that you really have to be an expert at what the original is to tell that the other one is poison. So, yeah, I believe it too. It's really, it really is important concept to get, and without that, it's really difficult to explain some of the, especially as you get into Derech Hashem. It's hard to explain some of the concepts without getting into those ideas. Okay, mic's free. I'll let Bahanu speak.